And on behalf of the participants and on behalf of the HRD, so I'm very much thankful to you, sir.
So nice. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I leave now.
Yes, sir. Please.
Yeah.
Dear participants, another session is about to begin. I'm just introducing the speaker, MP Bezborauh. He's an eminent professor, and he completed his PhD in economics from Gauhati University. And he involved in 21 research projects funded by the UGC, ICSSR, Oil India Limited, Indian Oil Corporation, ONGC, Planning Commission, UNICEF, etc. And he has been coordinator of UGC Special Assistance Program, Departmental Research Support since 2011 for the Department of Economics, Gauhati University. And he has publications, nearly 57 publications in journals, and he published 5 books. And articles in edited volumes are 28. And he served as a member of Indian Council of Social Science Research and Academic Council of Cotton University, and a member of Senate, IIIT Gauhati, and a member of Academic Council of Rajiv Gandhi University, and member of the Subject Committee for Economics, Commerce and Management and Business Administration of ICSSR. And he participated in planning and policy formation as a member of State Advisory Committee of Assam Electricity Regulatory Commission, and a member of Advisory Committee constituted by the Government of Assam for revitalization of state's economy in the backdrop of the situation arising out of COVID-19 pandemic and consequent lockdown, and is a director in the board of Assam Power Distribution Company Limited from March 2011 to December 2014, and a member of RBI Committee on Financial Sector Planning for Northeast Region, Usha Thorat Committee from January to June 2006, and has been director in the board of Assam Industrial Development Corporation from 2001 to 2005. And there are so many.
Please keep that, okay? I mean, keep it simple. Otherwise, I'll not have time to speak.
Yes, sir. So it is very. I'm glad to meet you through online, sir.
May I know your name?
Yes, I'm Ramakrishna from Commerce Department. I'm an assistant professor in this department. Because of a school board meeting,
I know.
He told me department is the name.
It's nice seeing you, actually. Hope we'll meet sometime.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Please have a session, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning to all the participants and others. And so these back-to-back sessions are very difficult. If you had a offline kind of a thing, you'd have had a tea break now. But instead of tea, you have to have me, actually. So I'll try to keep things as cheerful for you as possible. But when you're talking about inequality, there's not a great deal of opportunity to smile and, joke about, actually. It's such a serious matter. So let me start by trying to share my slides. Let me see if it goes successful. I'm always have a nervous feeling when trying to share my slides. Is it coming out?
Sir, yes, sir.
It's coming out. No, let's see if it moves and all. Is it moving?
Yes, sir. It's moving.
Okay. So we'll go to the slideshow. Okay.
Yes,
Shall I begin?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay, and now the time is a little squeezed. I'll try to finish the presentation in 1 hour so that I can leave at least 15 minutes for the participants if they have anything to talk about. Okay, so let's move on.
Thank you.
But tell me if the next slide is moving or not. Are we to the slide number 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
It's moving.
good. Because sometimes, if you particularly in Google Meet, sometimes the things become difficult. So, my friends, as you know, that we are going to discuss about inequality, and this topic has become extremely important, particularly after globalization. We have seen that there is a inequality is nothing new. As I have written in the first point, it is as old as human society. But that time the inequality is whoever has more physical power will have more, more of it, and those who are weak they'll have less of it. But then inequality has over the years have become more and more serious problem at various points of time, and there has been many attempts to address the issue. So we'll be limiting ourselves not to the prehistoric inequality, but we'll start with the inequality that has come into the world after the Industrial Revolution. So in the modern world, what's really happening, but mostly we'll be focusing on post-globalization inequality. So first 3 or 4 slides are basically to clarify a few, not necessarily exactly clarify, but state in the whole thing, what the various concepts which are related to inequality, in case you are not already a student of inequality. And I have to admit that this whole presentation is drawn significantly from the work of one of my PhD students. Not entirely, of course. I mean, he knows. So inequality obviously is disparity, So, and we have a social dimension and an economic dimension which can actually interact. When you say inequality is a social phenomena, we talk about inequality among groups, right? So, for instance, in our society, we know that certain categories of people, certain castes, for instance, have been discriminated over, or they have had a disadvantage for centuries. So they have a disadvantage. So they similarly, even today, women generally all over the world actually they still lag behind those of the world than men and all that. All right. Okay. Similarly, slavery is gone, but in the US society, you still find the blacks are behind the whites in many parameters. Similarly, if you go to any theocratic state, that is where state runs on the basis of religion, you'll find that minority the religious groups are normally somewhat at a disadvantage compared to them. So these are the dimensions of social inequality. Now, when you come to economic inequality, it is basically the disparities in the access to various economic resources like income, consumption standard, resource, how what you call wealth and those kind of things. So when you have a disparity in this, okay, at the level of individuals or at the level of households, we call it economic inequality. Incidentally, these two things are not independent. I mean, not entirely independent. I mean, so they actually interact. So, for instance, if you look at Indian society, you will find the so-called scheduled castes are also the economically most disadvantaged. That sort of thing. So, actually, what happens if you have social inequality? That actually leads to inequality in opportunity. And because of inequality of opportunity, your economic outcomes can also be, you may have a disadvantage. So we'll move to that point very quickly now. Reflectors of economic inequality. Where can you see inequality? So if you look at the literature on inequality in India, what you'll find actually is that most of these literature, they measure or they try to look at inequality in the consumption, they call it monthly per capita consumption expenditure. So this is not, so that reflects your consumption standard, but not the consumer durables as such. So basically, the current consumption, dal, chawal, roti, sabji, what is the disparity in that consumption? Now, why is it so? It's because, NSSO produces data on it has been producing for a long time data on household consumption expenditure. So that is why it is sort of easy to sort of look at inequality in terms of consumption expenditure. But I have to say, if you look at the disparity in consumption expenditure, it may not seem to be so stark. Actually, economic inequality is much, what should I say, much more acute than what becomes clear from inequality in consumption standard. What are the reasons? See, the rich people, they save, right? So they also save a part of their income. So if you're looking at consumption, you are not including the saving. By saving, what do? Actually, you add to your future, consumption. You add to your current wealth and you add to your future consumption. So that part is not included. On the other hand, if you look at the poor, many poor people sometimes have to borrow money for sustaining their basic consumption, particularly if some accidental things happen in the thing. So that part is also not reflected, that they are borrowing. Borrowing means you are actually reducing your future consumption. Okay, so your current borrowing means your current consumption is, borrowing for current consumption means that your future consumption opportunities are reduced. So that is not reflected. So that is why it is better, if you can get the data, it is better to have, income inequality, economic inequality should be measured in terms of inequality of, individual or household income. Now that has become a little possible. So we have actually done some of this, but I'm not going to give you those data and all that. So here, the idea is basically we run in terms of ideas. Now, if you can also measure inequality in terms of your wealth position. Wealth means you can have physical wealth like cars and houses and land and buildings and all that. And also you may have physical financial assets like bank balance, equity investment, mutual fund investment, and so on and so forth. So if you try to look at inequality in the asset position, wealth position, you'll find that inequality is even more stark, actually. So there are 3 dimensions. I think I'll go by income inequality. That is the most, sort of the middle thing and more inclusive kind of a thing. So if you have any difficulty, you can stop me in between and we'll continue. Now, I think this slide is rather important. So this may be new to many of you also. So here I'm trying to draw a distinction between unfair and fair inequality, and also between good and bad inequality. These are the words which are used in the economic literature. So let's try to understand this. See, the inequality may arise firstly because of some circumstantial factors. Okay, and over these circumstantial factors, you have no control. For instance, in which family are you born? Are you born in a rich family or a poor family? Are you born in a so-called forward caste or a backward caste? Are you born in a black family or a white family? So the race, are you a boy or a girl? So the race, gender, cultural context, location. Are you born in a rural area or in an urban area? All right. So all these factors actually condition your economic opportunities to a great extent, and therefore you may be poor not so much because you lack effort or you lack sort of intelligence or anything, but because your circumstances in which you find yourself actually doesn't allow you to become economically more better off. So that kind of inequality, which is not because of your own, not because of factors within your control, but because of factors beyond your control, this kind of inequality is called unfair inequality. It's not fair, it's not fair because you are born, that's quite an accident. Okay, accident of birth has made you poor, okay, or made you rich. Now, fair inequality, on the other hand, in a particular class of students, for instance, some of the students are more hardworking, brighter, they get good results. All right, so after school, they go to medical school or management school and all that, then they actually earn a lot of income. On the other hand, there are other people who are not so bright, so they don't go to that high-paying professions. So they end up becoming somebody, maybe, less earning. So there is a difference in earning, but this is not related to sort of, these are not circumstantial. These are because of your effort. So this is called fair inequality. So fair and unfair inequality, because in any society, some amount of inequality is bound to be there. If you want to make all societies, equal, completely equal, actually the society will not grow. There's a good example of this in the WhatsApp group. Sometimes I saw, so they wanted perfect equality in the classroom, so the teacher could give only 1 mark to all of the students. Now this has actually disastrous effect, because the poor students will not study in any case. Even the better students will stop studying and all that. Okay, so the advancement of knowledge do not take place. So fair inequality is bound to be there, but unfair inequality can be actually reduced. Some policy need to be taken to reduce unfair inequality, so that social policies can be taken, so that discrimination on the basis of social categories, race, gender, cultural context, and location can be reduced. Now, bad and good inequality are more or less similar. Okay, now let us talk about good inequality. Now, this arises from enterprise. Enterprise means what? Basically, we are all from commerce, economics, and management. So we understand what is an enterprise. Enterprise is essentially the application of an idea for making economic gains and all that. Now, an entrepreneur, if you're entrepreneurial, what you do? Actually, you create something. All right, you have a new business activity, new business model, new activity. All right, from which you profit. Not only you profit, but you also give something to the society. Okay, society gets better off, and you create jobs for others. So here you are not only creating your own wealth, but also adding to the wealth of the society beyond your own wealth, and also creating jobs for others, livelihood for others. So this is called a good inequality. The inequality arising from entrepreneurial, activities. On the other hand, you can become rich by literally stealing. This is not called stealing because you want to be nice. They call the activity rent seeking. What is the rent seeking? Say, for instance, you occupy an important office, all right, in the bureaucracy. So many people will come, for a thing. And if you take bribes from people, and you become rich. So here you're not creating any wealth, right? So you're not creating wealth, but at the same time, you're becoming rich. So nobody is benefited with you. So this is actually called rent seeking. Similarly, suppose you have a monopoly power over something, and the market is not competitive, so you can overcharge people, limit production and overcharge people, and so you're not creating, basically again that extra profit you get because of your monopoly power. This is also called rent. Okay, so rent seeking is something which results in inequality without society getting much better off out of it. So this is called a bad inequality. So unfair inequality and bad inequality need to be sort of addressed through policy, whereas fair inequality and what we call good inequality we have to live with. In fact, we need this because so that society progress this further. You may debate this, you may not like it, but this is the whole idea about this. Now, I think I'll have to reduce this, skip this slide because, but briefly, let me tell you, people thought that developing inequality is essential. Initial years, you have to increase inequality. Why? Because people thought, and particularly Kuznets and all others articulated the whole idea, that actually, initially, suppose from a poor society, you want to grow to a wealthier society. So you have to, you need capital, which you have to invest. All right, now capital cannot be for mobilization of capital, it may be necessary to, distribute the national income unequally so that rich get a better share. So if the rich get better share, they will be able to save a larger part of the income. And this additional savings are going to, sort of increase the productivity of the society if it is invested properly, of course, and then we will be able to break free from the vicious cycle of poverty. So this was a traditional argument. All right. And this argument is now found to be very flawed. I'll come to that. Particularly in the present context, it has been found to be flawed. But what we find, okay, later on, of course, the inequality is going to reduce because if you have a high growth, now the benefits of growth is going to trickle down even to the sort of poorer section of the society. So if you have many sort of people doing very well, they'll be hiring drivers, they'll be going to restaurants, they'll be spending money, so the waiters and drivers will also get benefit. So that is an example of a trickle down kind of an effect. So this is how inequality is going to get reduced in the longer run. But again, if you look at the economic history of the 19th and the 20th century, This theory seems to explain the whole thing. Because in the 19th century, after the Industrial Revolution, and as it was spreading to various countries of the Europe, we found that inequality has been growing steadily in the 19th century, if you look at the data. But in the 20th century, you find that inequality, particularly up to 1970, up to 1970, inequality was gradually getting reduced. So this theory by Simon Kuznets seemed to be sort of holding. I'm sorry, actually, I did not had a list of references at the end of it. I should have had. I have only the names, unfortunately. But if you are sort of interested in the area, you can search the names and find out the appropriate references. Now, one name I'm going to mention is Thomas Piketty. I hope many of you might have heard his name. He has worked tremendously on inequality in recent times, and his 2 books have actually created a lot of flutters. The first one was the Capital in the 21st Century. That's quite good. That came out in 2013 in French version, and 2014 the English version came out. And I think in 2020 he came out with the other book, which is known as Capital and Ideology. It's a very interesting book. If you haven't read it, I'll recommend that you can read. And it's a fat book. Of course, you cannot read it in one sitting. So there's a chapter of 50 pages on India, because in this book, he has included experiences from various countries. So for India also, he has a chapter of 50 pages. And that is so sort of, comprehensive, engrossing and all that. He writes about us, but, I think we can really read that. That 50 pages on India. I think it'll be a good reading. So what Piketty has done, why I'm mentioning Piketty? Piketty has showed that this is not so much because of the economic factors. In 20th century, inequality has come down because of other things. When the wars broke out, First World War, Second World War, there was a Great Depression, and all those kind of things actually made the rich people, they've suffered. So, basically, the gap between the rich and the poor actually declined. And after the post-war period, the labor unions were very, very active. And so therefore, the workers were actually, their salaries went up and all that. So for 2 decades, they had a very good time. And so it was because of labor unions and the wars and the other, events, which actually caused the, reduced inequality in the 20th century. Now, what we find actually is that this theory has not been found to be very good in recent times. What happened actually, when the East Asian countries actually developed, Taiwan, Korea and all that, what we found actually is that these countries could develop, without increasing the inequality. So actually, if you increase inequality, it can, in the long term, harm your growth. Why? Because although the saving may be, greater, but at the same time, you make, spread of education, spread of healthcare, etc., you restrict that. If you restrict, healthcare and education, then what happens? Your labor force cannot become very, very healthy or educated, and therefore they remain less productive. Now, if they remain less productive, obviously your growth is going to suffer. So this is what happened actually. The opposite of it, what happened in Korea and Taiwan and all those East Asian countries, basically they had, growth without increasing inequality, because they were banking mostly on their human resources and all. And what happened actually is that post-globalization, this is a recent phenomena. What you find actually is that if the country has shortage of capital, this is no longer a binding constraint, because the capital is floating all over the world now, in developed countries particularly. A lot of people save, old people save, young people save and all that. So the capital, they are flushed with capital, and the capital is looking for opportunities to invest, because in their own country, the rates of returns are not going to be very good and all that. So as a result of which, capital has become very mobile in the post-globalized world, and so has become technology. So this has actually removed one of the major constraints of developing countries, namely the shortage of capital and, of course, backwardness of technology. I'll come back to this point a little later. Okay, now I'm coming to the inequality in the globalization, post-globalization world. Globalization, you all remember, basically it means that countries of the world are coming closer to one another. So And some of the economic features of globalization from the earlier ones are that, I mean, it's basically IT also facilitated. So therefore, there was a great movement of capital, great, improvement in the trades, the growth in trade across countries, that the exchange of goods is there. Growth in services have become very, very important. Earlier globalization rounds, there was not much of trade in services. That has become important. But even more important has become mobility of capital. All right. So capital has started moving from one country to the other. All right. And with it, it was bringing not only, so earlier only the goods were movable across countries, not factories. Now what has happened? You have heard about the global value chains, right? So any particular production process now may not be produced, may not be taking place in one country, but it may be taking place in a global value chain spread over 4 or 5 countries, and so parts of factories have started moving out from one country to other countries. So this is a new phenomena or new feature of this, 20th century globalization. And that has actually been extremely important, for inequality point of view also. So what we find actually post-globalization, inequality within countries have actually accentuated in most countries, except a few countries like Denmark or Scandinavian countries. Most countries of the world, developed or underdeveloped, you find that inequality has increased. Even in China and India, inequality has gone up, and USA, inequality has increased very, very severely, But if you compare inequality across countries, that has actually come down. Now, how has this been possible? Okay, so this has been possible, as I said, because of the global value chain. So many countries actually now, many companies, big companies now actually located their production facilities outside their countries, multinational companies, so which has benefited the working class and the others. Why are they locating in other countries? Because other countries are offering cheaper labor and less tough environmental regulation. So it becomes much more profitable to do certain processes in other countries. So they have started moving out. The global value chain has moved out from through the global value chain. The production processes moved out to the developing countries. This has helped the developing countries like India, China, and all. And of course, China no longer would like to be called itself a developing country. It's a developed country. It actually contributes, they say 25% of global growth itself is dependent on China now. Anyway, so basically these countries are benefited. But in the process, what happens? The not so skilled workers in the developed countries, they have actually suffered. So their income has not actually risen, because they have lost jobs to developing countries. And what we find actually, there was a great deal of inequality. So what are the factors which cause? Okay, I think I have explained this. Okay. And within countries, why has globalization led to more inequality? Let's look at these factors. Piketty has again found that in the long-term rate of return of capital, let me not, on capital as being higher than rate of growth. So if the economy grows at suppose 5% and return on capital grows at 7% or 6%, that means, the properties is giving you more income than average income growth in the country. So that was one of the approximate factors. But why has it happened? Okay, now economists say that, the taxes have become less regressive. Progressive and regressive taxes, you all understand, I believe. A progressive tax is what? Give me a second. Hello. Oh. All right, I'm so sorry. There was an interruption. No, you know what? Progressive taxes means, if you're richer, you pay a higher percentage of your income as taxes. Now, what happened actually is that in the 1970s, first Margaret Thatcher, then Ronald Reagan, these were the Prime Minister of Britain and sort of President of USA. They have actually reduced the taxes to increase their growth, because that was a time the world was facing this stagflation. Growth was So they thought that if we reduce the taxes, the rich are going to invest more and all that. But then taxes remain regressive rather than progressive. So that actually contributed to inequality. Now, other dimension of inequality is that, wage inequality and unequal access to quality education. Particularly in the West and to some extent in our country also. Now, what is happening, in fact, is that there is earlier inequality was between the workers and the capitalists. If you read Marxian literature, it's a subject of inequality between the capitalists and the workers. But now, even among the workers, you find that wage inequalities are very, very high. If you look at IT professionals, the earnings of these people are much higher than, the people who work in factories and all that. Okay. And this has resulted because of unequal access to education. See, if you want to become an IT professional, you require very high quality education. Now, to high quality education is not available for everybody. You may have the talents, okay, but you may not have the resources to go and take this high quality education. You can't have the coaching. So, for instance, now to get into IIT without coaching is very difficult. It's one or two students make it, but generally you have to take coaching. If you want to join medical school, you have to take coaching. So everybody cannot afford this. So, this actually leads to sort of, contributes to inequality, because people don't have access to, good education, which can lead them to, high paying jobs. So therefore, high paying workers are few and therefore they enjoy a premium on their wages. And so wage inequality has contributed. Now, one more thing which will become extremely important in our discussion on universal basic income is automation. And my previous speaker was also saying something about that. See, many of the processes are, particularly the processes which are repetitive in nature, are getting automated. Okay. So even the teacher's job is to, the automation has started. If you have this, platforms like, what do you call that? MOOCs and what are the other one? I forgot the name now. It's not coming to me. Okay. Those classrooms and all that. So these are getting automated. I give the lecture, I stored it. So next time I don't have to give it. So unless we are innovating our teachings or we are adding to our knowledge or we are doing some kind of research, even a teacher's job is getting more or less automated. So if automation has actually, made many people redundant, robotics and artificial intelligence is going to actually increase the process of automation. Now, many people say that we should not automate to the extent that workers are going to be badly affected. Now, this argument is always given whenever there is a automation process or mechanization process. Say, for instance, when banks were, for instance, were computerized, many people, particularly politicians in the left, they said that this should not be happening because it is better to carry those ledgers of the bank rather than to automatic system, because this is going to displace work. But then you have to see that if I pursue that example, if the banks were not computerized, you will not be using those UPIs, internet banking, credit cards anymore these days. All right, then we are obviously better off after the bank automation. So similarly, all these automations, if there are robots everywhere to do the nursing, to do various things, I think the automation is robotics are particularly important for, I think it's necessary to clear things like, our municipal garbage and all those things. I think it's human beings doing that is very sort of demeaning. Anyway, so automation everywhere may actually take place. And you can't really, if automation is going to give increased efficiency, you can't say no to it. It is going to come out. So this is going to reduce the work available for human being, maybe much reduced. So you may divert into, more productive or creative kind of activities. You'll have less risk, but then income, you have to have income. All right. So this is the challenge. So to which I'll be talking about shortly. I'll skip the other points. Now this also I'll just show, I'll not explain. Why is it necessary? You see, in particularly if I take the Indian example, from 1992 to 2018, this 25 years or so, India had a very rapid growth. India has also declined in poverty, but India has also increased inequality to some extent. All right. So if you have decline in poverty and high growth, you have, all right, should we bother about inequality? Let society be more unequal. What does it matter if poverty is coming down? Now, actually, there are counter arguments that we cannot let inequality alone. First thing is that, if inequality was not rising, probably India's poverty would have been getting faster, reduced even more. Secondly, if you live in an unequal society, discontentment, all those things are much more, and this can lead to actually a lot of violence and all. So the government will have to waste its precious resources. Actually, government resources are only our resources. We'll have to controlling these kind of activities and all. So, and otherwise also they have found that many scholars have found, particularly I'd like to mention the work of Skadel. Skadel is a historian who found that, the cause of things like, socially disrupting things like wars and revolution and state failures and even pandemic, he found, it is basically to do with inequality. So if growing inequalities are actually dangerous, it will destabilize nations, it destabilizes social things. So we need to keep inequality under bounds. So this is something which most of the economists and thinkers, the workers on inequality believe. So what kind of policies can we take? The policies that we can take, first of all, traditionally, what is taken is the taxes and transfer. I mentioned about progressive taxes. Whole purpose of progressive taxes is that you raise money from the richer people in the society and transfer it to the people. It may be in the form of cash, or it may be in the form of free education, free healthcare, or free ration, or whatever. But you transfer basically that, so that the inequality is not unbounded kind of. Now, we have also talked about social inequality, and this arises, or you can say unfair inequality. This arises from inequality of opportunity. Now various social policies can be taken to reduce what you call the inequality of opportunity. So if everyone, you grow according to your talent, according to your merit, but you must have the opportunity, equal opportunity as others. So that can actually eliminate a lot of inequality in the society. Okay, so this is something which the government should always try to do. So that is why we have this, what is known as affirmative policies like reservations and all that. I am for reservations, although I think we can still look at reservations more critically, so that is to make it more effective. So what is happening as a result of reservation is that some communities are getting benefits, which is quite good because they have been lagging behind. But what we find actually is that certain section within these communities are cornering most of the benefits. It's not percolating down all the communities. So I think there is a need to sort of review our reservation policy. Anyway, I'm just talking, that's not the main thing. Now, the idea of universal basic income, this is where my focus is going to be for the next, half an hour or so. So this is something which is, extremely important. As I said, because of automation also, we are going to lose a lot of employment opportunities. And in that context also, this is extremely important. And this informally already has been in some kind of application in India. So let's come to the idea. So this is, I am in the halfway through. So if you have some questions in the chat box, will you help me to, Ramachandran? Are there already any questions or clarifications? Hello?
Hello.
Yeah. So I'm reached the halfway stage of my. So at this point, anyone requires some kind of clarification or something? No?
I haven't seen any other questions.
Okay,
Sir.
good. So let me carry on then. Okay, you can go back to mute.
Yes, sir, please.
Please come back when I show that thank you slide. Okay.
Sure, sir, I'm here.
Yeah. So what is universal basic income? Okay, you must have heard the term. It has become, it has been very actively sort of discussed now. Universal basic income has been conceptualized as a, I'm reading it out because it's important, conceptualized what? As a regular financial payment made to all adults. Okay, not to the rich or the poor. It has to be made to be all adults irrespective of whether they work or not, and without any conditionality. So it has to be a regular financial payment to everyone. All right, that is called everyone, whether you are, working or not working, whether you are rich or poor, it has to be given to everybody. And secondly, it has to be given unconditionally. It's not that you have to return the money, or you will not get it because if you are an upper caste or you are already a businessman or something like that. So this is the whole idea about universal basic income. You may find that it is quite odd that everybody should receive a payment from the government, but I'd like to point out that this is actually, it actually makes sense. Now, before that, receiving it has to be deemed as a fundamental entitlement rather than a dole or a favor. It's not a favor, which, sometimes politicians tend to do, we're giving you this, so please vote for us. It's not that. It has to be a fundamental right. Okay, so it is an entitlement. Everybody is entitled to get, whether it's BJP, Congress, or any other form of government is there in power. So it should not be a fortune. Okay, what should be its quantum? It should not be very large, because if it is very large, you may become very lazy. So it should be just enough so that you can buy your food and the basic necessities. So if you don't have a job, at least you can survive. So it should be just enough so that no one needs to, there's an I in between, please ignore it. It should be just enough, okay, so that no one needs to go hungry, or everyone can have a basic standard of living. So that is, you have to fix up a basic standard of living. So that can vary from country to country, society to society. Then give the money so that people can afford this. Okay, what you do is a different matter, but that is what the whole idea of universal basic income. Now, why should it be universal? That's the first point. Why should, for instance, me, or for that matter, Mukesh Ambani should also receive this income? Mukesh Ambani is an extreme example, of course, but basically I'm trying to get your attention. The idea is that if you get a target-oriented scheme, so if you say that I'm going to get only to the poor, then you have to define poverty, and some people may not have the papers to show that they are actually poor, so they may be left out, So there can be what we call exclusion error. Then exclusion error can be very, very, dangerous. Now, there's a guy called Guy Standing, who has written a book on universal basic income. He says that this should be universal not only in terms of household. It's not that every household should get a particular amount, but he says that every adult in the household also should get this. So if you have a husband and a wife or a grown-up children, they should all get it. Now, what's the idea? Why? The idea is that, if women, many of whom don't go to work outside, basically they use their skill and energy for, keeping everybody happy in house by providing cooking meals and keeping the house clean and all that. So, basically they sometimes don't get the due respect and, the empowerment for their great work. All right. Now, if you give them, the transfer goes to them also. So they will be treated with greater respect. They'll be more empowered. So that is why it's necessary to give to everybody. Even the children, grown-up children, they may be very embarrassed to ask for resources from others. So, basically, if they receive some kind of, daily monthly transfers like this will make them less dependent on others, and that will make them feel happier. Now, why it should be unconditional? Because some people say that, if we have limitation of budget, let's not pay to the people who are employed. Now, what happens actually if you make it conditional? Suppose you are on the verge of getting a job, all right? So should you work or should you stay home? If you work, if the condition is there that, you will not be entitled for this if you work, in that case, you may have a, incentive not to join work. This is called the unemployment trap. So you would like to be trapped in unemployment, particularly if you're not getting a very good, well-paying job and all that, because you have plenty of time to do other things and all that. So they say that whether you're employed or unemployed, don't ask the question, give it to everyone. Now, why is it becoming, more attention? As I have already said, automation is going to, making a job, it's threatening to do sort of, threatening livelihood. So, for instance, now next batch of automation is going to be in healthcare. That's already happening in Japan. where they're not encouraging immigrants. Many other countries, when they have they run into labor shortage, they get the immigrants in the society. But Japan is not that kind of thing. So they are going rather for automation, robots and all that, to look after older people, sick people and all that. Now, automation actually next is going to happen. You all know, probably heard about driverless trucks and cars. So this is going to come in an automobile industry. Just imagine how many opportunities or driver jobs will be lost. So all these things are going to reduce employment. So people will require some kind of resource to fall back upon. Otherwise, actually, the whole system will collapse. Because if inequality increases to that extent that there's not demand for commodities in the world, so we require not only the growth of income, but circulation of the income. Circulation can happen only if it is redistributed. So this is one way of redistributing the income. So in the Indian context, we can see that in the economic survey of 2017, there's a very detailed discussion on this. So if you're interested to pursue, you can read that chapter on universal basic income in the Indian context. But what should I say? We have not fully, in fact, no country actually has fully adopted this concept as yet. It is still in the realm of discussion. The pandemic, after the pandemic, we see that government is transferring money to many households, particularly to women and all that. It's not entirely the whole idea of basic universal income, but at the same time, this is some kind of beginning, you can say, because that was a time where so many people actually, particularly those who are in the informal service sectors, they lost their livelihood. So when the government actually gave not only the free food, but also this income transfer, somehow people have survived. Inequality has definitely gone up during the pandemic situation. But then the poorest of poor has, because of this transfers, could see themselves through the pandemic situation. Now, big question. This is the most relevant question. So how do you sort of make, how do you raise resources for this? All right. That is a big question. Now, the first thing they say is a concept of virtuous rent. Virtuous rent. It's not a, remember earlier I said the rent seeking is something which is not very honorable. Actually, it is a more respectable term for stealing. So if you are collecting bribe from people whom you should be giving the benefit, what basically you are doing is that you are fleecing my pocket, right? So it's not a good thing. So rent generally is not considered to be a great honorable work in a term in economics, a form of income in economics. But at the same time, virtuous rent is something which is, the rent, this is that kind of rent which is not evil, which is actually considered to be virtuous. Now, what's the whole idea? See, in this society, in this economy of society, we as individuals use many things which do not belong to us or any particular member. Say, for instance, we use the service of the environment. All right. So environment is nobody's personal property. So when we exhale, what do you call carbon dioxide. When you drive vehicles, we release exhaust to the environment. We create garbage, we let it rot at the same time, but the environment takes care of all that. Okay, but this is a service which we take for free. It's a common environment, is a common property. We are taking it for free. Similarly, water resources and all that. I live in Gauhati, where the mighty Brahmaputra flows by. But in the households we don't have water, so water we buy from trucks. But whenever the water is given by the government, distributed by the government, this will become practically free. It's very low price and all that. But this actually again is not the river, the water in the river Brahmaputra is not anybody's personal property, right? So these are common property of the people. Similar is the case of minerals and all that, right? So various coal mines and all that. So you may have an ownership of land on the surface, but below the surface, the groundwater, the minerals, all these are actually not your property. These are common property of everybody. So for the use of this common property, they say that we should charge, user charges, which are called, virtuous rent for water, minerals, and the environment. Whoever uses, by whatever means, if we collect people from using these things, this virtuous rent collection can be quite substantial, and on which everyone in the society will have a claim. All right. So part of your, sort of money required for the universal basic income can come from this collection of virtuous rent. So many of the services are not tax or user charges are not imposed as part. So we can do that. Now, second is that greater taxation of corporate income and income of their top executives. There's another author called Stiglitz. He has been working, he is a Nobel laureate, and his book on inequality is quite famous. Other books are also quite famous, but the book on inequality is called The Price of Inequality. So he shows that the corporates are taxed very lightly. They have much more capacity to pay taxes than they are actually taxed, and many of their top executives earn salary well beyond their productivity. Their productivity, suppose, should have been giving them a salary of 1 million, but they may be having 5 million or something, all right, annually. And so therefore they are these incomes, the corporate incomes and the incomes of the top corporate executives who are earning in excess of their productivity, this should be taxed very, very heavily. That's the other idea. Now, the last two ideas are also quite interesting. The progressive wealth tax. Wealth is not taxed very progressively. Let me come to the last one. That's more important. I think that can explain you. The greater circulation of wealth. I have mentioned Piketty's book on capital and ideology. In this book, and in the earlier book also, he said that wealth gets concentrated generation after generation. So if as one generation passes off, all the wealth we have amassed in this present generation passed on to the next generation, and they keep on adding to that. So wealth becomes, the wealthier people becomes even more wealthier, all right. And so wealth get more and more concentrated in the hands of a few. Now Piketty says that to reduce, not only to reduce inequality, but also to increase more productivity in the society, it's very important to circulate the wealth. So he talks about circulating the wealth. Now, how do you circulate the wealth? He says that, let there be very heavy, what we call inheritance tax. So as my, suppose my parents die and all that and leave a fortune to me. So as I go and take, as I try and take possession of this fortune, I should be made to pay at least, he doesn't say how much, maybe say half of it as a form of this tax to the society. So if that can be done, actually, wealth will be taken away by state and redistributed. He doesn't even mention state. He says that various formation you can have, which may not be exactly state. So this can be now circulated among the others through the whole mechanism of universal basic income. So wealth will get more circulated. So greater circulation of wealth can actually reduce inequality. In fact, Piketty suggests what? That as you attain the age of 25, every individual should be given a particular capital transfer. All right. So give them, suppose, 5 lakhs of rupees or whatever amount you can, so that this young person of 25 years of age, presumably have completed education and all that, they can use it for various purposes. Maybe they can use it for getting a house, or maybe getting a good computer, or investing in some kind of business, or show it to the bank as a sort of, that this is the money down payment I'm going to give, so that you can give me a loan and all that. So Piketty talks about that. That's very radical, but then that is the idea, the kind of idea because the world is becoming more and more unequal, and inequality is not acceptable. It can create a lot of problems. We have to think radically about this kind of things. Now, there are a couple of apprehensions regarding the idea of universal basic income. What is the first apprehension? Will not the higher taxes slow down the growth and wealth creation? So economists have been traditionally very skeptical about raising taxes, because if you raise taxes, income taxes, particularly even on the rich and high income and profit, the people incentive to sort of invest or earn more, create more wealth, maybe adversely affected, because you don't get to retain most of it. State is going to take away. Now the question is, what is the optimal level of taxes? That can be debated actually. So as I said, Stiglitz and all think the tax rates are very low actually. It can be raised. So in some countries, perhaps the taxes are still very low, that can be raised without actually harming profitability and income. So for instance, people like Bill Gates now, so he is not taxed, all right, very heavily, but at the same time, 90% of his income he transfers to the Bill Gates Foundation, right? So that means there could have been more taxes. Bill Gates Foundation is doing good work in the society, but every rich man may not be like Bill Gates, okay? Or every in India, for instance, Ajim Premji is also doing a great work. I'm not saying Mukesh Ambani and Adanis, they are sometimes are not doing good work. They might be doing good work also. We may not know, but at the same time, there is a scope for raising taxes. What most economists who have analyzed the issue find. Now, earlier people are very skeptical about it. Now there is greater support for, particularly post-globalization. Inequality led to a lot of problems. Have you heard about? Do you remember that there was, Occupy Wall Street movement in USA? Inequality inspired these kind of things, because in USA post-globalization, the income of the middle class actually in 20 years declined by 20%. So that's a massive, decline in income is very difficult to accept. So if your income goes up, you can quickly increase your standard. But if your income goes down, reducing the standard is very, very painful, So there's a lot of unhappiness regarding inequality. So something dramatic has to be done. All right. So this is one thing. Now the second, there are two more apprehension. One is that will free transfer not be a disincentive to work and effort? Okay. So if I get free transfers, okay, will it not lead to disincentive for work? Many people in India, villages, if you go, they say that these days it's difficult to get a person to work, all right, because they are getting those job cards and they got money and therefore they don't want to come to work. Now, if you analyze this issue, it's not like that. Anrega job card, how much money is it provided? It provides about 150 rupees or something, or if it has been raised a little. All right. So that's not enough, actually. If you go to the urban areas, you find that wage rates are 3 times more than that. Okay. So basically, the people who are not getting, people to work in the fields and all that in the villages, it's because you're not ready to pay the necessary amount. And as a result of which, the workers from Assam villages, or for that matter, Orissa villages or Bengal villages or UP villages, they are going to Kerala, Gujarat, Andhra Pradesh, and what is the other state called? Karnataka, because the wages are much higher. All right. It's not that people are unwilling to work, or Enrega is actually, inducing people not to work. So, and Abhijit Banerjee, again, you heard his name. He was the latest economics Nobel Prize. I mean, not last year, year and year before, but from Indian origin. So again, I am sorry, I did not give you the list. I'm not going to give you the list of books now. So he, in his experimental studies, have found that actually this has not happened, because you give some kind of transfers which are not sufficient. As I say, initially, as I said, universal basic income is not supposed to be excessive. So it should not be a disincentive for work. So if you readily analyze this problem, it's because people are not willing to pay enough. In fact, Enrega wages may make it possible that workers are not going to be so desperate that they will work for nothing practically, which is a good thing, because otherwise their condition is going to be even worse. So if you give them a proper wage, people are going to come and work. The other thing is that, will it encourage temptation goods? What are temptation goods? Drugs, all right, alcohol, marijuana, and all that kind of thing. So if you give money to people, all right, unconditionally, freely, are they not going to have more, fritter out in consumption of alcohol and all that kind of things? Now, this is again a very empirical question. You can't discuss this theoretically. Some may say, oh, this man is getting more drunk because he's getting the money free now. But does he represent the whole sort of people who are receiving the money? So we need to do more research. Again, the research has found that there's no significant increase in, consumption of what we call consumption of temptation goods, because you're receiving some kind of free income transfer. And this argument is more given in the context of whether, it's not regarding whether you transfer or not, but do you transfer in the form of food or do you transfer in the form of cash? See, if you're trying to transfer in terms of goods and services, that's a little difficult, more difficult to deliver, because not only you have to transfer the resource, but then you have to see that the goods reach the people. But on the other hand, the direct benefit transfer through bank transfer, these are much easier to do, and you are giving the people to freedom to spend it the any way you like. So, for instance, if we give only rice, and I am sick actually, I need medicine more than rice. If you give me money, I think this will be more useful, because I can buy medicine and I can wait for rice a little later, or you can share the rice. All right. So this is the argument that this can. And the third point here is very interesting. Some studies have found that because of universal basic income, the consumption of temptation goods have actually calmed down. Now, how is it possible? It's possible because many people take to consumption of such things because of the pressure, the tension, the what we call the stress, because of lack of livelihood and all that. Now, once they're assured of some kind of support, they may actually avoid consuming such things. Just give me another half a minute break. Now, these are not my findings or ideas. Okay, these are something which have been found in research by various people, and I am actually summarizing their findings only. So I think I am progressing towards more or less the last slide. Yes. Now, this is important. See, if you make everybody more secure, all right. Okay, so they are sure of getting some amount of income, then people become less risk averse. Now, since you are all people from economics, commerce, and management, enterprise involves risk taking. Now, if you are so poor that you don't have 2 square meals a day, you have no ability to take risk. Anything which is risky, you will shy away from it. But if your basics are taken care of, if you are assured of a certain basic income, then you can experiment with some kind of risk taking, and therefore you can venture into various entrepreneurial activities. So resulting diffusion of entrepreneurial activities can make, can result in, widely shared growth. Now, what is widely shared growth? See, when you have growth for which you have to exploit the poor and all that, this is going to increase the inequality. Now, what I mentioned about East Asian countries, particularly Taiwan, now, for instance, Bangladesh and all that, what do you find actually is that the growth is such that a large number of people can participate in. You develop their human resource, you develop their skill, but there are so many small and kind of, it's organized in such a way that it's not concentrated in 1 or 2 factories, big factories, but it has a whole base of, widely spread, from which we actually now aggregate, then move on, and so on and so forth. So if you have that kind of pattern of growth, for having that kind of pattern of growth, we require entrepreneurial talent, entrepreneurial activity flourishing at the grassroots. Now, this can be facilitated by, implementing universal basic income. Why? Because after they are assured of the basics, they will have the comfort and assurance of some livelihood, and this will actually enable them to experiment with enterprises and ideas. So I end my presentation basically with a quotation from Mark Zuckerberg. I don't have to introduce you to him. You all know about him. He says that we should explore ideas like universal basic income to make sure that everyone has cushions to try new ideas. Okay, this has come from a top, industrialist who has benefited from the IT sector and has become very rich. So even he feels that universal basic income is a good idea. So I am not taking sides. There are many issues in implementing the whole idea, but as a concept, as a thinking process, we need to start thinking about it. Otherwise, we are going to have basic problems. And government is already experimenting it, but I think it needs to be further expanded. Okay, with this, I thank all of you. So if you have any questions, I'll be ready to address them. I'll be willing to, rather. I'm not sure I'll be able to do it. Can I stop sharing?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, if they desire, if they want, you can actually sort of share the slides. I can send you a copy, or maybe Jyoti Kumar, I'll send a copy of the slides.
Okay, okay, sir.
Okay.
Sir, what is the role of CSR in this universal basic income, sir?
Role
Corporate
of what?
social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility, sir.
Yeah, corporate social responsibility can actually be one of the sources, because now corporate social responsibility is something like tax only, So 1% of profit you really have to by compulsion spend. So it's not longer a voluntary kind of a thing. So that can be one of the things, and it can be easily roped into the whole idea. And as of now, I think corporate social responsibility, if I know some of the companies like Oil India and all, many of it is actually wasted, So you have some kind of fund, then you give it to, all useless or useful seminars, or you give it to do Saraswati Puja to the local people and all that. Those kind of things, that doesn't add to the whole thing. I mean, if on the other hand, they could have given it for building social capitals like roads and all that, could have been better. So I think this is one source you mentioned. I didn't mention. Probably you had this in your idea. So that money can also be roped into, corporate social responsibility. It will be happy. I think the companies will be very happy to do that, because in that case, they don't have to carry out the activities themselves. They can simply contribute, and that money the government or whoever is in charge can actually utilize for the universal basic income purpose.
Sir, some of the state governments are directly offering the cash incentives to the every individual,
Yes.
common people.
Yeah.
So, does it not harmful for the employment? Like it makes them lazy. So
that's what I was trying to explain. This is to a great extent, this has not been found to be well founded. They are not so much. I didn't understand that. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This mobile is sometimes really creates a nuisance. What I'm trying to say here is that it is, it's not that it makes them lazy. It makes them rather, less desperate. So if you have no source of income, what happens? You are very desperate. So you will work at any cost, right? So now you may refuse to work because the wages are very low, and that may be interpreted as laziness, but it may not be exactly lazy actually. And most of the case studies have found that this is not the case actually. In NREGA studies also in India, the argument you are putting forward, the many people actually, particularly who makes this thing, the allegation, you go to the villages, the people who are more privileged, they have been, they and their forefathers have been in the business of exploiting the poor and all that. So you'll hear from them, middle class and upper class, and actually the truth is different, because their jobs are not paying here, people are not working, because working also so this what has been found. I'm not taking a position, because this is an empirical issue, and empirically people have found this is not a serious kind of a problem. Yeah.
And one more thing, sir, because of this universal basic income, governments may utilize this as a vote banking instrument. Do you feel like that? To grab the vote banking?
Yes.
So they are giving more incentives than in some states like Andhra Pradesh, I can quote. They're giving more facilities on a free of cost basis, even though the people have affordable capacity to take those things.
Yes.
So in such an environment, it becomes like a vote banking instrument. Don't you feel like that, sir?
I know. That
So
can
if any state, other states, by looking at them, try to grab the vote banking and all, if they follow the same system by giving so much of incentives to the public, so it may drag the state into the debt trap also.
Absolutely, absolutely. So idea is not that actually. So universal basic income is not supposed to be excessive, you know. So it is supposed to be certain amount, which is just enough for you to buy food and your maybe a few phone calls and all that kind of stuff, you know, whatever you decide as basic, depending on that particular society. So it is not, I think, I mean, if suppose you want to implement that in India, it should not be decided by state government or central government. It should be decided by somebody like, you know, some body, neutral body like Niti Aayog. Of course, how neutral Niti Aayog can be is different matter. So they need to sort of work and basically sound empirical basis, you know, they have find out that on Delhi prices, this should be the minimum income that should be given. And then other states, you can adjust their price index and all that. So like petroleum prices, Delhi has a different price, Gauhati has a different price, Aizawl has a different price. So similarly, we can be working out and what is the amount, and that need to be transferred. So this should be independent of what does. Then, of course, if every government is compulsorily doing it, so that may be required. So like kind of GST, you can't do politics with GST, right? Okay, we can't say we are going to reduce the GST by one particular state and all. The GST council is a good idea. Maybe we can have universal basic income council, which will decide what should be the universal basic income. Obviously, it has to be linked to the revenue. And the kind of politics you're talking about, you know, giving more and more doles, this is not a very good thing. You know, why? Because you favor certain categories, all right? So they may be even caste or religious categories. So that actually accentuates the difference between the castes and all that, all right? Secondly, you know, the politician thinks in terms of 5 years. So 5 years, let me be in power. But next 5 years, you know, it's a repayment time. So repayment time, it becomes more complicated. Okay, for you're creating problems for the future government. So that is the problem in a democracy where we have government changing every 5 years and all that. You know, sometimes the long-term goals are actually sort of sacrificed unless we have statesmen everywhere. You know, we don't have statesmen everywhere. So that is one of the problems we have to live with. So here, actually, I think the civil society, the economists, the academics, you know, they need to create the awareness and inform the people. Hopefully things will improve. But if it is implemented in other countries, maybe our country will also get inspired and try this.
Sir, there are a few questions in the Q&A
Yeah,
box,
please.
sir.
What
Impact does inequality have on sustainable development?
I had one slide there, which I do not like to go back to. See, what happens actually is that if you have more and more inequality, particularly when the benefits are not going to the, some of the benefits are not shared by the poorest section of the society. So their healthcare, their education do suffer, first of all. So this actually reduces the possibility of growth from the supply side, because if your workforce is not very productive, they're not educated, they're not healthy, they will not be productive, obviously. So therefore, your growth potential is going to suffer. That's the first point, which is very, very important. So we need to have greater inequality, at least of, you know, in distribution of basic necessities. Second thing is that if you have inequality of opportunities, so we can't go to, many people cannot go to medical schools, you know, or, you know, technology schools and all. What happens actually is that the people who pass out of these kind of schools, they are scarce. So they get very, very high salaries. In fact, more salary than they probably deserve. All right. So this actually, again, creates problem. And other problem is that, you know, I can give you an example here. We did one study 20 years back, of course. Two districts of Assam. One is Dhubri, other is Tinsukia. Tinsukia is the highest per capita income district of Assam. Tea gardens are there, mining industry is there. But there's great inequality. People who are in the tea industry, I mean, basically tea executive or Oil India workers, they're better off. The others are not worse off as such compared to Dhubri, but they are comparatively worse off. But in Dhubri, there was not many people were rich. All of them were mostly poor. So Dhubri at that time was the poorest district of Assam. So what you find actually is that in Dhubri, but there is not internal quarrels and all that kind of thing. Everybody is poor. They have not seen a richer person and all that. But in Tinsukia, there was a lot of, you know, sort of unhappiness or, you know, even strife and all that. All right. So inequality imbibes, you know, sort of jealousy and sense of unfairness, and therefore it actually makes people sort of, take up arms. And I have cited some studies and all that. They have found that wars and all that, that, I mean, it becomes very easy, because if it's a very unequal society, you can always say, that it's because your job has been taken away by others. Okay, so it is easy to foment kind of social tensions and conflicts. Okay, so I think there should be more equality for maintaining social stability. And there are also studies that in unequal societies, people's mental health is also suffered. You have more mentally unhappy people in a society which is more unequal than in a society which is relatively equal.
Sir, one more question, sir. Lack of equal opportunities in education is one of the greatest cause of inequality. So, in such a situation, do you think the NEP 2020 is suitable policy in order to reduce the inequality in future?
This is, the National Education Policy 2020. Actually, I have not taken too much of interest. It's not going to affect me because I'm retiring in 1.5 years. So by the time it's, but I have some idea about it. It talks about structural change. It talks about research and all that. So basically, we need to, strengthen our research, and of course, so those kind of things are talked about. But I don't think it has addressed enough the whole question of equality of opportunities. So that need to be separately addressed. So what new education policy is going to is planning to do is put up a particular structure and particular content which probably will take us forward. But to make sure that everybody, all the talented children, I'm not saying everybody should get a higher education, all the talented people who deserve some kind of thing, they should be able to get it. So for instance, if you can make the entrances, which are not so dependent on things like, tuitions and coaching centers, I think this can do a great opportunity, because I cannot see a person who's in interior Assam village, maybe however talented you are, it will not be easy to compete in the, say, IIT JEE or IIT, whatever the other thing you call, because these people will not be able to afford the coaching. You can make the education free, but you can't make coaching free, right? So and now joining in engineering, medical, and all those kind of things is making it very difficult. And if you look at the medical entrance, for instance, so many people now actually sacrifice 1 or 2 years of their life. If you're not making it this year, you're trying for next year, then trying for next year and all that. In the process, you actually can mess up your life. If you become successful next year, it's well and good. But if you have not, then you you fail the third time and all that. So you can have a major setback and all that. I think we really need to look into those kind of things, how we use scout talent, okay, for various courses and all that. So this is something, an area which has not been addressed enough, I believe. We need to do it.
And one more question, sir. If it is possible to go to the tribal areas where there is no transport facility and get votes, then why can't a good administration bring development projects to all sections of this society? For a long time, we have been justifying some theories like trickle-down effect.
Yeah, trickle-down, as I was explaining, trickle-down will not happen unless you are in a location where you can get the crumbs of the bread coming down. If you are in an isolated tribal area, there's no way you're going to get the trickle-down effect. So interventions are needed. But there are again two theories. Extra, ultra leftist. There's a one ultra leftist theory that if you construct the roads there, it's basically the traders who arrive and have the first advantage. So the tribals will be even more exploited. Instead of that, you should leave them alone, let them find their own dynamic way of their own dynamics to grow. But that is not going to work, because the present generation tribal may not want it, but the next generation, they will have somehow some kind of exposure to various ways of life, and they may come up and say that you have not done anything for us. Okay, so we'll turn rebellious. What is the benefit as remaining a part of the country and all that? So I think the first kind of theory, the ultra leftist theory, need to be sort of ignored, and we need to at least connect them. We need to give them choice. We should not impose our whole thing, but you can give the opportunity. These are the things. You can come to school, you can learn if you want to. And so that something is needed. By the government should improve the connectivity. I think government has actually have an emphasis on connectivity now. All governments, I'm not saying just the BJP government in the center and all that, particularly in the Northeast, I now see Assam particularly, connectivity has really improved. And that has actually transformed the village economy. So many workers from Assam is now working in Kerala and all those states. I mean, basically they are sending money. People say that they are actually left from home and all that, but they are getting more money. They're sending money, some kind of village economy thing. In fact, I estimated in the COVID time that 1% of state domestic product comes as remittance from these kind of workers. And this goes directly to the poor families from where the people have gone to work and all that. So I think connectivity is extremely important. That cannot be ignored. And that will open up the interior tribal societies also to the new world. So you should not force them, but they will learn by themselves. They may, because the way they have lived throughout the years, they have remained tribals, but at the same time, they're not different human beings. They're like human beings like others also, So they have the same feelings, temptations and love and good things and bad things. So I think they will also respond in a similar kind of a manner.
And what form of universal basic income you will prefer, either in monetary transfer to all form or better employment opportunities to all?
See, it's not a question of employment. Employment, you're employed or unemployed. That doesn't come to the whole question. You see, many people may not actually seek employment. Whole idea is that, some income, which basically will be sourced on the basis of use of our common properties, okay, our common resources. Everybody will have to pay for using the common resources. And you have to remember the richer use these common resources more. I have one car, of course, but many people don't have cars in India. But some people may have 10 cars. So if you're running 10 cars, you are polluting the environment much more than others, right? So actually you are entitled to pay more. So people will have to pay more for the common resources that it belongs to the society. So that need to be redistributed to everybody. It's an employment opportunity is not there. You can't create employment opportunities. It's a dynamic world. Employment opportunities just arise or they disappear. As I was giving you the example of the bank automation. When the banks were automated, we have teller machines and all those kind of stuff. Many people, we are not required for those kind of things. Okay, but at the same time, this has created opportunities for other businesses. So opportunities have arisen elsewhere. Okay, then we have this services like Uber and all that, or for the matter, say as we have this online shopping business. What is happening, in fact, is that many shops probably are not doing as good business as before. But then you have these people who are transporting these things. So job is lost somewhere and job is created somewhere. It's a dynamic world. It's going to happen like that. You can't really sort of hang on to some existing jobs. These are going to be boundary. So to cope with this kind of dynamic changes in the world, I think if you have the universal basic income, you'll be better off. Otherwise, if you lose job, you are in a serious distress. You may commit a lot of things, including suicide and all that. Okay, but then if you have basic things to fall back upon, you can try something else. You can retrain yourself. The Piketty's idea of giving those amount of money initially. So you can retrain yourself. Suppose you have studied English literature or Mizo literature, but then at 25 years, you feel that you'd have been better to learn, accountancy and all that. You can start learning that. Okay, retrain yourself and all that. So I think there are a lot of merits to the whole idea, but implementability is a serious issue. So we really we should not discard the idea. We should have it. But we should be focusing more our mind and energy and talent in how to make it actually workable and implementable.
Okay, sir. That's all, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Coffee, eh?
Yes.
I hope I could give you some kind of an account. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thanks for your valuable time, sir.
No, it's all right. Okay. I hope to meet you someday. Okay.
Sure,
I am not very good at remembering name. Can you say it again?
Ramakrishna, sir.
Ramakrishna. That'll be easy, Ram Temple and Krishna Temple. Okay. All right. Okay. And you are from the Department of Commerce?
Yes.
Are you from the Department of Commerce? Okay. Okay,
Yes,
Ramakrishna.
sir. Yes, sir.